When Maya Williams vanished from the Appalachian Trail in 2016, everyone thought they knew what happened to the experienced 24-year-old hiker. 2 years later, investigators found something in the woods that would expose a truth so disturbing, it would destroy careers and shatter everything people believed about missing person cases. Most people think when someone goes missing in the wilderness, search teams do everything possible to find them. Most people believe law enforcement treats every case with equal urgency and dedication. Most people trust that detectives follow every lead no matter how small. Maya Williams' family believed all of these things too, until they learned the horrifying reality of what really happened during those crucial first weeks when their daughter needed them most. Detective Frank Hartwell stood in front of the cameras on October 15, 2016, exactly 30 days after Maya had disappeared, and delivered what would become the most hated press conference in the county's history. With his cold, dead eyes and a smirk that barely tried to hide his contempt, Hartwell announced that the search for Maya Williams was being officially suspended. "Listen, folks," he said, adjusting his belt over his massive gut, "this girl was having problems. Boyfriend troubles, job stress, family issues. Sometimes people just want to start over somewhere new, if you catch my drift." Maya's sister Jessica watched from the back of the room as her world crumbled. Her father David gripped the metal folding chair so hard his knuckles went white. The detective continued with the casual cruelty that would define his handling of the case. "We've searched every reasonable area. She's either long gone by her own choice or—" He shrugged. "Well, nature's got its own way of dealing with people who bite off more than they can chew." The room erupted. Jessica Williams pushed through the crowd of reporters, her voice breaking as she screamed at Hartwell. "She would never just leave. You don't know my sister. You don't know anything." But Hartwell had already turned away, dismissing her with a wave of his hand like she was an annoying fly. What Maya's family didn't know at that moment was that Detective Hartwell had made this decision not based on evidence or proper investigation, but because he was 3 weeks away from retirement and didn't want a complicated missing person case messing up his pension paperwork. But here's where the story takes a turn that will make your blood boil. Maya Williams had last been seen on September 15th at the Timber Ridge Trailhead, a popular starting point for day hikers and weekend campers. She was experienced, well-equipped, and had texted her sister Jessica that morning saying she planned to hike the Pine Valley Loop, a moderate 6-mile trail she'd completed dozens of times before. When she didn't return that evening and missed her planned check-in call, Jessica immediately contacted park rangers. The initial search began at dawn on September 16th with over 40 volunteers combing the marked trails and surrounding areas. Maya's tent was found intact at the designated campsite number 7, her sleeping bag neatly rolled, her food stored properly in the bear-proof container exactly as regulations required. Her hiking boots sat outside the tent entrance, but her day pack, water bottles, and emergency gear were gone. Everything suggested she had left for a morning hike and simply never returned. The search dogs picked up her scent leading away from the campsite toward the Pine Valley Trail, but the trail went cold after about 2 miles. And that's when Detective Frank Hartwell took over the case, and that's when everything went horribly wrong. Instead of expanding the search area or bringing in additional resources, Hartwell immediately began building a narrative that Maya had deliberately disappeared. He questioned her friends and family not about where she might be, but about why she would want to leave. He asked Jessica about Maya's dating life, her job satisfaction, her financial situation. He treated every interview like an interrogation designed to prove his theory rather than find the truth. What made Hartwell's behavior even more despicable was his complete dismissal of the family's desperate attempts to help. When David Williams offered to hire private search teams with his own money, Hartwell told him it would interfere with the investigation. When Jessica brought him detailed maps marking areas that hadn't been searched yet, he glanced at them for 30 seconds before tossing them in the trash. When Maya's college roommate called with information about Maya's hiking habits and favorite off-trail spots, Hartwell never returned the call. The local volunteer search and rescue coordinator, a woman named Carol Martinez who had been finding lost hikers for 15 years, tried repeatedly to convince Hartwell to expand the search grid. She explained that experienced hikers sometimes take unmarked paths or follow stream beds that don't appear on standard trail maps. Hartwell's response was to ban the volunteer teams from the search area entirely, claiming they were contaminating potential evidence. In reality, he just didn't want witnesses to his lazy, half-hearted investigation. As September turned to October, Maya's family watched in horror as the search efforts dwindled from 40 volunteers to a handful of park rangers doing courtesy sweeps of areas they'd already covered multiple times. Hartwell's press briefings became increasingly hostile toward the family. He started making snide comments about helicopter parents and adults who can't handle their children making their own choices. The media began picking up on his narrative, and soon local news stories were questioning whether Maya Williams had really vanished or simply chosen to disappear. But what Detective Hartwell didn't want anyone to know was that he had received not one, but 3 separate tips during those first crucial weeks that he had completely ignored. The first tip came from an elderly local man named Robert Chin who had been hiking these mountains for over 30 years. On September 18, just 3 days after Maya disappeared, Chin called the sheriff's office to report that he had heard what sounded like someone calling for help from a deep ravine area about 4 miles southeast of the Pine Valley Trail. The area was known locally as Devil's Drop, an unmarked section of wilderness that most hikers avoided because of its steep terrain and dense undergrowth. Chin told the dispatcher he couldn't get close enough to investigate himself because of the dangerous terrain, but he was certain he had heard a woman's voice echoing from somewhere down in that ravine system. The dispatcher logged the call and forwarded it directly to Detective Hartwell's desk. Hartwell glanced at the message, decided it was probably just an echo from another hiker on a distant trail, and threw the tip in his trash can without even visiting the location. The second tip came from a teenage girl named Amanda Foster who had been camping with her family near Willow Creek, about 3 miles from Maya's last known location. On September 20th, Amanda told her parents she had seen flashlight signals coming from an area of thick forest that didn't have any marked trails. She described seeing 3 quick flashes, then a pause, then 3 more flashes repeated several times over the course of about 10 minutes. Amanda's father, a former Boy Scout leader, recognized this as a distress signal and immediately drove to the ranger station to report it. The ranger on duty took detailed notes about the location and timing, and personally delivered the information to Detective Hartwell the next morning. Hartwell listened to the ranger's report while eating a donut and checking his email, then told the ranger that teenagers see flashlights everywhere, and that it was probably just other campers. He never investigated Amanda's sighting. The third tip was the one that should have broken the case wide open, and it was the one that would later destroy what was left of Hartwell's reputation when the truth finally came out. On September 25th, a local wildlife photographer named Marcus Reed was working in an area about 5 miles from the main trail when he discovered what appeared to be pieces of torn fabric caught on tree branches leading down toward a hidden ravine. The fabric was bright purple, the same color as the hiking jacket Maya had been wearing according to her sister's description. Reed carefully marked the location with GPS coordinates and took detailed photographs before calling the sheriff's office. He spoke directly to Detective Hartwell and offered to guide a search team to the exact location the next morning. Hartwell's response to this potentially crucial evidence was so callous it still makes people angry when they hear about it today. He told Reed that fabric gets caught on trees all the time, and that purple is a pretty common color for hiking gear. When Reed pressed him and offered to show him the photographs, Hartwell actually laughed and said, "Listen, buddy, I've been doing this job longer than you've been taking pictures of squirrels. If there was anything worth finding out there, we would have found it already." He hung up on Reed without even asking for the GPS coordinates. For 2 weeks, these 3 tips sat ignored while Maya Williams might have been alive somewhere in that wilderness, possibly injured, possibly trapped, definitely needing help. Detective Hartwell spent those 2 weeks not searching for Maya, but building his case for why the search should be called off. He interviewed Maya's ex-boyfriend twice, trying to get him to admit they'd had a fight before she left. He questioned her co-workers about her job performance, looking for evidence of stress or depression. He even went through her social media posts from the previous 6 months, searching for anything that might support his theory that she had chosen to disappear. Meanwhile, Maya's family was going through absolute hell. Jessica Williams barely slept, spending her nights studying topographical maps and her days hiking every trail she could reach, calling Maya's name until her voice was gone. David Williams took unpaid leave from his job and spent his life savings hiring a private investigator, only to have Detective Hartwell threaten to arrest the investigator for interfering with an ongoing case if he set foot in the search area. Maya's mother Linda stopped eating and started having panic attacks every time the phone rang, hoping it would be news about her daughter but terrified of what that news might be. The community was watching all of this unfold, and people were starting to ask uncomfortable questions about Detective Hartwell's handling of the case. Local businesses offered reward money. Volunteer groups organized their own unofficial search parties, though they had to be careful to avoid areas where Hartwell had banned civilian searchers. Social media groups formed dedicated to finding Maya Williams, sharing theories and organizing awareness campaigns that Hartwell openly mocked in local news interviews. And that's when Hartwell made the decision that would haunt him for the rest of his career. On October 15th, exactly 30 days after Maya's disappearance, he called that press conference where he announced the search was being suspended. He stood there in his wrinkled uniform, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else, and essentially told a grieving family and an entire community that Maya Williams wasn't worth looking for anymore. But what Detective Hartwell didn't know was that his nightmare was just beginning, because exactly 2 years later, someone was going to find something in those woods that would expose every lie he'd told and every corner he'd cut. Dr. Sarah Mitchell was not looking for a missing person when she entered the Devil's Drop ravine system on October 3, 2018, exactly 2 years and 18 days after Maya Williams had vanished. Dr. Mitchell was a botanist from the University of Virginia conducting research on rare fern species that only grew in the deep, humid microclimates of unmapped Appalachian ravines. She had no idea that she was about to discover something that would turn Detective Frank Hartwell's comfortable retirement into a living nightmare and finally give the Williams family the answers they had been desperately seeking for 24 months of pure agony. Those 2 years had been the darkest period of the Williams family's lives. Jessica Williams had quit her job and spent every weekend for the first year hiking unmarked trails, following every possible lead that Detective Hartwell had ignored. She carried Maya's photograph and showed it to every hiker, every camper, every park employee she met. Most people were sympathetic, but some looked at her with the kind of pity reserved for people who can't accept reality. The media narrative that Detective Hartwell had crafted was working. More and more people believed that Maya Williams had simply chosen to disappear, and Jessica was starting to be seen as the delusional sister who couldn't let go. David Williams had remortgaged his house to pay for private search teams, thermal imaging flights, and even a psychic that Linda had insisted they try in a moment of desperation. Every lead turned into another dead end, every hope got crushed, and every month that passed made it less likely that Maya would ever be found alive. The private investigator they had hired eventually told them gently that after a year, they should start thinking about memorial services and moving forward with their lives. David threw the man out of his house and didn't speak to anyone for 3 days. But Jessica Williams was not ready to give up, and what she did next would prove to be the decision that eventually brought her sister home. In January of 2018, Jessica filed a formal complaint against Detective Hartwell with the State Police Internal Affairs Division. She had spent months documenting every failure in his investigation, every ignored tip, every dismissive comment he had made to the media. She had tracked down Robert Chin, Amanda Foster, and Marcus Reed, the 3 people whose tips Hartwell had ignored, and convinced them to provide sworn statements about their contacts with the detective. The internal affairs investigation moved slowly, but it did move. By August 2018, Detective Hartwell was facing serious questions about his handling of not just Maya's case, but several other missing person investigations from his final years on the force. The state police had quietly reopened Maya Williams' case and assigned it to Detective Lisa Hammond, a thorough investigator with 15 years of experience in wilderness search and rescue operations. Detective Hammond's first action was to interview every person who had provided tips during the original investigation. Her second action was to organize a comprehensive search of all the areas that Detective Hartwell had refused to explore. Dr. Sarah Mitchell knew none of this when she rappelled down into the Devil's Drop ravine that October morning. She was focused entirely on locating a rare species of cave fern that hadn't been documented in this region for over 50 years. The ravine was everything the local hikers had warned her about: steep-sided, filled with loose rock, and so overgrown that she had to use a machete to cut through some sections. About 2 hours into her descent, Dr. Mitchell noticed something that didn't belong in the natural environment. At first, she thought it was just an unusual rock formation, something white and smooth nestled against the base of a large oak tree. But as she got closer, Dr. Mitchell realized with growing horror that she was looking at human bones. Her scientific training kicked in immediately. She stopped moving, marked her exact location with GPS, and took photographs from multiple angles before she touched anything. What she saw made her stomach turn. The bones were clearly human, scattered in a pattern that suggested the body had been there for a significant amount of time. But there was something else, something that made this discovery even more disturbing. Scattered around the bones were pieces of hiking equipment. A water bottle with a carabiner still attached. Remnants of what had once been a day pack, now mostly rotted away but still recognizable. And wrapped around one of the arm bones, barely visible under years of accumulated leaves and debris, was a purple hiking jacket that had somehow survived the elements better than everything else. Dr. Mitchell had found Maya Williams, but the location where she found her told a story that would make Detective Hartwell's negligence even more horrifying than anyone had imagined. Maya wasn't just randomly located in this ravine. The evidence around her body suggested she had survived the initial fall and had lived for several days, possibly even weeks, before finally succumbing to her injuries and exposure. There were clear signs that she had tried to signal for help. Rocks arranged in an obvious SOS pattern. Tree branches broken and arranged to create markers. Even scratch marks on nearby trees that formed arrow shapes pointing toward the ravine entrance. Maya Williams had been alive down in that ravine, fighting for survival, sending every signal she could think of, while Detective Frank Hartwell sat in his office telling reporters that she had probably run away to start a new life somewhere. The 3 tips that Hartwell had ignored, the flashlight signals that Amanda Foster had seen, the cries for help that Robert Chin had heard, the purple fabric that Marcus Reed had found, they had all been real. Maya had been exactly where these people said she was, doing exactly what they said they had witnessed, and she had died alone in that ravine because one lazy, arrogant detective couldn't be bothered to do his job. But that's not even the worst part of what Dr. Mitchell found that day. As Dr. Mitchell carefully documented the scene, she noticed something that made her blood run cold and would later become the piece of evidence that destroyed any remaining sympathy anyone might have had for Detective Frank Hartwell. Carved into the trunk of the oak tree directly above where Maya's body lay, barely visible under years of moss and weather damage, were letters scratched deep into the bark. Dr. Mitchell had to clear away vegetation and use her magnifying glass to make out what Maya had carved during her final days alive, but when she finally decoded the message, she had to sit down to keep from vomiting. The carving read, "Day 12 still alive, help trapped below Devil's Drop, called police October 2nd, no rescue, Jessica, tell mom love." Maya Williams had survived in that ravine for at least 12 days. She had been conscious, alert, and strong enough to carve a message into solid oak. She had somehow managed to get a cell signal on October 2nd and had actually called for help, but no rescue had come. She had been alive, waiting for someone to find her, while Detective Hartwell was telling reporters that she had probably skipped town to avoid her problems. The implications of this discovery were so devastating that Dr. Mitchell immediately called 911 and demanded to speak to the highest-ranking police official available. Within hours, the Devil's Drop ravine was swarming with investigators, forensic experts, and search and rescue teams that should have been there 2 years earlier. Detective Lisa Hammond, who had taken over Maya's case from the state police, arrived on scene and took one look at the evidence before making a phone call that would ruin Detective Frank Hartwell's retirement. She called the district attorney's office and requested that criminal charges be considered against Hartwell for negligent homicide and obstruction of justice. But the nightmare for Detective Hartwell was just getting started, because Dr. Mitchell's investigation of the ravine was far from over. As she continued documenting the site over the next several days, she found evidence that painted an even more damning picture of Maya's final weeks and Hartwell's criminal negligence. Maya had fashioned a crude shelter using her day pack and broken tree branches. She had collected rainwater in her empty water bottle. She had even managed to start a small fire, evident from a ring of charred rocks and burned wood that had somehow survived 2 years of weather. Most heartbreaking of all, Dr. Mitchell found Maya's journal, wrapped in a plastic bag and hidden inside her makeshift shelter. The journal entries from her time in the ravine revealed the full scope of the horror that Maya had endured while Detective Hartwell was actively working to convince people that she had disappeared voluntarily. The entries started hopeful. Day 3, twisted ankle and fall but not broken. Found shelter spot. Cell phone dead but someone will come looking soon. By day 7, no search helicopters today. Getting weaker. Jessica knows I wouldn't just leave. They have to be looking. By day 10, heard voices yesterday but too far away to reach them. Tried to climb out again but can't make it with bad ankle. Why isn't anyone searching down here? The final entry, written in handwriting that was barely legible, was dated 13 days after Maya's disappearance. Can't feel my feet anymore. So cold. If someone finds this, tell my family I fought. Tell Jessica not Hartwell's fault, I trusted he would look for me. Tell Mom and Dad I love them. So tired now. Maya Williams had died believing that Detective Hartwell was actually searching for her, never knowing that he had called off the search after just 30 days and had spent more time building a case for why she deserved to be abandoned than he had spent looking for her. Even in her final moments, dying alone in a ravine that 3 different people had told him to search, Maya had more faith in Detective Hartwell than he had ever deserved. When the journal entries were released to the public, the community reaction was immediate and explosive. Protesters gathered outside the sheriff's office demanding that Hartwell face criminal charges. Local news stations ran special reports detailing every failure in his investigation. Social media exploded with outrage, and hashtag Justice for Maya became a trending hashtag nationwide. Detective Hartwell, who had been enjoying his retirement fishing and playing golf, suddenly found himself the most hated man in 3 counties. But Detective Hartwell's response to this mounting evidence of his negligence revealed just how fundamentally rotten he was as both a police officer and a human being. Instead of showing remorse or taking responsibility for his failures, Hartwell hired a lawyer and started giving interviews claiming that he had conducted a thorough and professional investigation, and that Maya's death was a tragic accident that couldn't have been prevented. He actually had the nerve to suggest that the people who had provided tips should have been more persistent, if they really thought the information was important. The community's anger reached a boiling point when Hartwell appeared on a local morning talk show and said with a straight face that Maya Williams made poor decisions that led to her own death, and that people need to take personal responsibility instead of always blaming law enforcement. The host of the show was so disgusted that she ended the interview early, but not before Hartwell had managed to make himself even more despicable by suggesting that Maya's family was using this tragedy to get attention and money from lawsuits. That interview was the final straw for Jessica Williams, who had maintained her composure and dignity throughout 2 years of hell while fighting for answers about her sister. And what Jessica did next would prove that Detective Frank Hartwell had picked a fight with the wrong family. 3 days after Detective Hartwell's disgusting television appearance, Jessica Williams walked into the office of the state's most aggressive civil rights attorney, carrying a box containing every piece of evidence she had collected over the past 2 years. The attorney, Margaret Chin, had built her career destroying corrupt police officers, and when she saw Maya's journal entries and the documentation of Hartwell's ignored tips, she smiled the kind of smile that makes guilty people lose sleep. Within a week, Jessica Williams had filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Detective Hartwell personally, the sheriff's department, and the county, seeking $50 million in damages and demanding that Hartwell face criminal prosecution for his role in Maya's death. The lawsuit was a masterpiece of legal destruction that laid out every single failure in Hartwell's investigation with surgical precision. It detailed how he had received 3 separate tips pointing directly to the area where Maya was found, how he had ignored all of them without investigation, how he had called off the search after only 30 days despite having no evidence that Maya had left the area voluntarily, and how he had actively prevented other agencies and volunteers from conducting their own searches. Most damaging of all, The lawsuit revealed that Hartwell had lied to the media and Maya's family repeatedly, claiming that all reasonable areas had been searched when in fact he had never even visited most of the locations that witnesses had suggested. The criminal investigation moved even faster than the civil case. The district attorney, facing enormous public pressure and overwhelming evidence of Hartwell's negligence, convened a grand jury that took exactly 4 hours to indict Detective Frank Hartwell on charges of negligent homicide, obstruction of justice, and violation of civil rights under color of law. The negligent homicide charge carried a potential sentence of 15 years in prison, and the federal civil rights violations could add another 20 years to his sentence. As the legal walls closed in around him, Detective Hartwell's true character became even more apparent. Instead of showing any remorse for his actions or acknowledging the pain he had caused Maya's family, he started a media campaign portraying himself as the victim of a witch hunt by people who don't understand police work. He gave interviews claiming that he was being scapegoated for a death that was nobody's fault, and that Maya Williams was ultimately responsible for her own poor decisions. Every time he opened his mouth, he made the public hate him more and strengthened the case against him. The trial became a media sensation that gripped the entire region. For 3 weeks, witnesses testified about Hartwell's failures, experts explained how a proper search and rescue operation should have been conducted, and Maya's family finally had the chance to tell the world about the nightmare they had endured while Hartwell dismissed their daughter's life as worthless. The most powerful moment came when Jessica Williams took the stand and read Maya's final journal entry aloud, her voice breaking as she described how her sister had died still believing that Detective Hartwell was trying to save her. Hartwell's defense strategy was as disgusting as everything else about him. His lawyers tried to argue that Maya's death was inevitable because of her reckless decision to hike alone, that the tips he had ignored were too vague to be actionable, and that even if he had searched the ravine immediately, Maya probably would have died anyway. They actually brought in a medical expert who testified that Maya's injuries from the fall would have been likely fatal regardless of when she was found, conveniently ignoring the fact that she had survived for almost 2 weeks and might have lived if she had been rescued promptly. The jury saw right through these pathetic attempts to shift blame away from Hartwell's criminal negligence. After deliberating for less than 2 hours, they returned guilty verdicts on all charges. The judge, clearly disgusted by Hartwell's complete lack of remorse throughout the trial, sentenced him to 18 years in prison and ordered him to pay full restitution to Maya's family for their legal expenses and emotional suffering. In a scathing statement from the bench, the judge said that Hartwell had violated every principle of law enforcement and had turned his badge into an instrument of cruelty rather than justice. The civil lawsuit was settled out of court for $37 million, money that Maya's family immediately used to establish the Maya Williams Foundation for Missing Persons, an organization dedicated to ensuring that no other family would ever have to endure what they had experienced. The foundation provides resources for families of missing persons, trains volunteer search and rescue teams, and advocates for legislation requiring proper investigation of all missing person cases. Today, Detective Frank Hartwell sits in a state prison, serving his sentence and facing the daily reality that his laziness, arrogance, and cruelty led directly to the death of an innocent young woman who trusted that he would do his job. His fellow inmates know exactly why he's there, and let's just say that former police officers who let young women die don't get much respect behind bars. Meanwhile, Maya Williams is finally at rest, buried in the family cemetery with a headstone that reads, "Beloved daughter and sister who never gave up fighting." The Devil's Drop Ravine where Maya was found has been renamed Maya Williams Memorial Ravine, and every year on the anniversary of her disappearance, hundreds of hikers gather there to honor her memory and remember that every missing person deserves to be searched for with everything we have. Jessica Williams still hikes those trails, but now she hikes with teams of trained volunteers who know that when someone goes missing, you don't give up until you bring them home. If this story opened your eyes to how important it is that we hold law enforcement accountable for doing their jobs properly, please like this video and subscribe for more stories about justice, accountability, and the fight to protect the innocent.